Welcome back to the show. I am here with two guests. Well, no, I got a co-host and a guest, both broadcasting from sunny Florida, making me super jealous today. Tessa, how you doing today?
Hey, good to see you, Ruben. I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. And I've got repeat guest, Mark Cramer, and Mark is here to educate us on air conditioners, on how home inspectors can better test air conditioners. How you doing today, Mark?
Great, great. How are you guys?
No
Great.
complaints. No complaints. I mean, I could be where you are, but that's all right. Um, Before we dig into it, I want to give a shout out to our show sponsors, IEB, Inspector Empire Builder. What I'm promoting right now is the next big conference that IEB is hosting. This is IEB Unite. We got a bunch of in-person things we do every year with IEB, but this is the big one. This is where, if you're just going to go to one every year, this is the one. You do not need to be a member of IEB to attend this. I will have a link in the show notes, but it's coming up May 28th through May 30th. This is in San Antonio, Texas. And besides all of the learning, we do a bunch of fun stuff together too. Lots of team building, lots of camaraderie. If you're a home inspector, you will be hard pressed to find a better group of people, more energized, more enthusiastic about this profession. It is a ton of fun, lots of energy. Check it out.
You ready for tough morning workouts?
Be ready for some tough morning workouts. Yes. Yeah, we do like to do those. And that might be one of my highlights of the trips. May or may not be. But okay, so I've got Mark Cramer on. Mark, we just had you on a couple of months ago, and we were doing our series with home inspectors all over the country talking about regional inspection differences. And one of the things we talked about on the show was air conditioners and how to better test them. And I can't remember who I was talking to, but we were talking about, is there really a better way to test it? Because what we always do is we test the temperature of the air coming in. We check the temperature of the air going out. I know it's a very limited test, but I don't know if there's anything better. And the consensus was kind of, yeah, that's really all you can do as a home inspector. We can't test refrigerant levels or any of that. And I just kind of went, all right, so we'll just keep doing what we're doing. But then Mark ended up listening to that show, and I think he must have called me in the middle of the show, and he's like, Ruben, I've got a better way to do it. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but he told me about it, and it was just way over my head. And I said, let's get you on the podcast. Let's talk about it. So Mark, correct everything I just got wrong and teach us, please.
That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Now, I'm a bit of an air conditioning nerd because in Florida, air conditioning is the most important thing in terms of living your life comfortably.
Yeah.
I mean, far more important than it is up where you live, Ruben. And as a result, we pay a lot of attention to air conditioning here, and we tend to learn a lot more about it than I would know about high efficiency furnaces, for example.
Yeah.
If you ask me about those, I'm kind of clueless. Whereas you would know all about them in your climate. But it just kind of drives me crazy that home inspectors are testing an air conditioner with a $7 thermometer from Walmart when they've got a $3,000 infrared camera and they've got a $4,000 sewer scope, and they're using all this technology for other things, but they're not using it for air conditioning when we have this much, much better technology available today. So there are better tools available today. They're much more accurate and easier to use, and there are better methods of evaluating an air conditioning system. There's some additional parameters that we can measure beyond just that temperature split, and that we absolutely should measure just beyond that temperature split. And there's some basic things we can do, which is what most home inspectors would want to do. And then there's some little more advanced measurements that people can take that the nerdy people can get into, beyond the basic stuff. Then the other thing that drives me crazy is, and somebody said this on a podcast with you, which is what prompted me to call you when you said, what should the temperature split be on an air conditioner?
Yeah.
And they said 16 to 22 degrees.
Okay.
Well, which is it? Is it 16 or is it 22?
Does
Okay.
it
How do you
matter?
know?
Apparently it does.
Yeah, of course it matters.
We don't
Yeah,
know these things up in
absolutely.
Minnesota.
So, and the answer to that question is, what should the temperature split be? The answer is your favorite answer, Tessa, which is
It depends.
exactly.
I knew that was
Okay.
coming.
Exactly.
Yeah, me too.
Now, I'm pretty much known for that, saying that a lot also. When I used to teach, by the end of the week, I would ask students, what's the answer to this question? They would always say, it depends, because they'd heard that come out of my mouth 300 times by that point. So, yeah, that's the right answer. It really depends. And it depends a lot on the humidity in the house, which represents latent heat. So, when we're measuring, when we're air conditioning, our air conditioning system is lowering the sensible temperature, but it's also removing latent heat. And that latent heat is the moisture that's in the air. It's contained within that moisture that's in the air. And that has a huge effect on what that temperature split is going to be. One good example that I used to use is if you take a pot of water and put it on a stove and you put a thermometer in it and you boil it, so that water temperature is going to be what? At sea level.
212 degrees.
212.
Right. And if you put a thermometer in the steam coming off of that, that's going to be what?
I have no idea.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be 212 degrees.
Okay.
But if you take your fancy infrared thermometer and measure the burner underneath that pot, it might be 600 or 700 degrees. So we're pumping that 600 or 700 degrees of heat into that water, and it never gets above 212 degrees. The steam coming off of that water never gets above 212 degrees. So that heat is a constant. We can't create it. We can't destroy it. We can only move it around. Where's it going? It's going into the steam, the humidity that we're creating in the air as latent heat. So,
changing forms takes a lot of energy from a liquid to a gas.
In the summertime, especially, it feels miserably hot because it is miserably hot. And a lot of that heat is humidity. So that's why we have that, if you see on the TV news, that feels like temperature. It feels like temperature is always higher than the actual air temperature here, because that feels like temperature is accounting for that latent heat, that humidity that's in the air. Okay, so our air conditioner does the same thing. We boil a refrigerant in the evaporator coil. And when we boil it in there, our heat source is the air. That's like the burn. And our gas that's created in that coil is like our humidity. There's latent heat in that gas. So we're taking out both sensible heat and latent heat when we're passing air over that coil. We can measure the sensible heat with a thermometer, but we can't measure the sensible heat or the latent heat with a thermometer. So we've got to measure that some other way. And we do that by either taking a wet bulb temperature. And if you recall the days of a sling psychrometer, that was a device that had a dry thermometer and another thermometer that you put a little piece of wet cloth over, and you swing that around and you get a wet bulb temperature and a dry bulb temperature. So that wet bulb temperature is actually accounting for the humidity that's in the air. So I'm going to, and to show you how much effect that actually has, I'm going to give you some numbers here. And I lost them. Give me a second. I got to find them again here.
I was going to say, how many people have seen a sling psychrometer? Probably not too many. Ruben, have you seen one in action?
I have seen them in books, and I have never actually used one myself.
Well, I've never used one, but back in school, at the U of M, I had a professor, Bob Seavey, and I remember he had one, and he showed us how it worked and what to do, and that was when we were talking about psychrometrics. So, take me back to my to my college days here, Mark.
I don't think I've ever seen one, but I've seen pictures of them. That's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing you have to realize about that latent heat is that whenever you change the state of a substance, when you boil that liquid refrigerant and turn it into a gas or a vapor, there is a huge amount of heat involved in that process. For example, to raise the temperature of a pound of water from 32 degrees to 212 degrees as a liquid takes about 180 BTUs. To go from 212 liquid to 212 vapor takes 970 BTUs, about 6 times as much. So there's a huge transfer of heat when we make that change of state. That's why we pressurize our air conditioning system, why we boil this refrigerant, is because we can grab a huge chunk of heat by that process and transfer it outdoors very easily. I mean, we could have an AC system that just had water circulating through it, and we could, as long as the water temperature is lower than the outdoor air temperature, we could transfer heat that way, but it's not very effective. We're not going to move a lot of heat until we get to that change of state. So I have, here we go. So this is a real world example. This is an inspection I did in January here in Florida. Outdoor temperature was about 65 degrees. And measuring the relative humidity in the house, we had a temperature split of 13 degrees, 67 return air, 54 supply air, 13 degree split at 70% relative humidity. So you can't check a system when the humidity is that high in the house. You can't walk into a house that's been sitting there and turn on the air conditioner and check it. You got to get rid of that latent heat first. So 2 hours later, we'd gotten the humidity down to 57%, which is still a bit on the high side. Our return air was 67. Our supply air was 49 degrees, which is an 18 degree temperature split.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, and the difference is, and at 70% relative humidity, we can't measure that latent heat using a thermometer. The other interesting thing there is that 70% of return air was 67. 2 hours later, at 57% humidity, our return air temperature was exactly the same, 67 degrees. So that temperature did not drop at all during that period because that system is busy taking out the latent heat. And until we get that latent heat load down to a reasonable level, we're not going to start to reduce the sensible temperature that we can measure with a thermometer.
So I mean, basically, this air conditioner has been running for 2 hours. And if you're only looking at the thermostat, you're going to say, look, it was 67 degrees 2 hours ago. It's still 67 degrees. My air conditioner is broken. It's not doing a darn thing. But in reality, it has been removing a ton of latent heat from the air, which our thermostat doesn't measure. I'm tracking. Got it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it.
Can I ask a quick question, Mark?
Sure.
What would be a good range for relative humidity in a house to get an accurate assessment of the AC? Do you want it to be somewhere between like 30 and 50% relative humidity or 40 to 60% relative humidity? You said 70 was way too high. What are you looking for?
So the answer to the question is it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
So I'm going to share with you a chart here. Let me see if I can figure this out.
So he's sharing a chart with us. And for anybody who's just listening, I will take a screenshot of this and I will put it in the show notes. And I will also likely try to upload a video recording of this podcast. We normally don't do that because, you know, if you look at us, you'd be like, hey, they got faces for radio. But we're gonna we're gonna try. We're gonna try it. All right. You've got a beautiful little chart here. Please talk us through it, Mark.
Now, this is our temperature drop, temperature differential, the difference between the return air and the supply air at the air handler. And all of these measurements that we're talking about assume that we have the correct volume of air flowing over this coil. Because if we don't, these numbers are going to change because the air is the heat source. So if we turn down the air, it's like turning down the burner, things are going to get colder. So if you have a dirty coil that's clogged up or a filter that's very clogged up, these numbers are not going to be what you're going to see. You're going to see a lower temperature, bigger temperature split. I've pulled a dirty filter out of an evaporator unit and had the temperature split go up by 6 degrees because that dirty filter was blocking the airflow, which is the heat. When we pull it out, the heat goes up, our temperatures go up.
Sure.
Does that make sense? No, I can see a dazed and confused look on your face, Ruben.
Well, so Mark, we're looking at a chart that shows along the x-axis, the horizontal axis in the bottom, temperature, and it looks like it's return temperature. What is the y-axis?
Okay, so our normal indoor temperature we aim for when we're air conditioned is about 75 degrees, somewhere right in here. This is our return temp, which is the temperature inside the house. These lines represent various humidity levels. So if we walk in this house and it's 75 degrees and the humidity is 70%, we're going to get about a 14-degree temperature split.
Oh, okay. Temperature. Okay, I got it. So the y-axis. Yeah.
50%.
Okay.
We're going to get maybe an 18, 19-degree temperature split. If we're in Las Vegas and the humidity is 30% inside the house, then we're going to get a temperature split of maybe about 25 degrees at that same 75-degree return air temperature. So
this is helpful. Okay, so the y-axis is your temperature split, and so you can see these
differential.
Yep. Okay.
And to make it really simple, the lower the relative humidity, the higher the temperature split.
Yes. Because why is it?
Latent heat.
Right. There's less latent heat.
Yeah.
Now, in our part of the world, when contractors size an air conditioner, we're sizing not only for sensible heat removal, but also for latent heat removal. And about a third of the capacity of our system goes to latent heat removal. Now, in your area, it would be less. It would probably be more like 20, 25% when they do that kind of complex calculation to figure out what size system you need in that house. In Las Vegas, it would be even less because they have much, much less latent heat there. So we could
I was just going to add really quick. Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to add, this makes so much sense. Thank you for pointing this out and bringing this to our attention, because you're right. It takes a lot of energy to remove moisture from the air. So if you've got a lot of humidity in your air, you're not going to have as much of a temperature differential because that energy is going to removing the moisture instead of cooling the actual air temp.
Yeah.
Right. Now, you say removing moisture, but what we're really removing is heat.
Right.
We are removing moisture also. We're dehumidifying at the same time. We're removing moisture and it's draining on the ground outside.
Right. Right.
but it's really heat that we're concerned about when we're talking about measuring a temperature split at an air handler inside the house. So this is an approximation. Now, there are other things we could look at. Let me
and real quick, while you're looking for that, Mark, the dazed and confused look is I'm not sure I was totally tracking what you were talking about with removing the furnace filter, because in my mind, you've got a really dirty furnace filter. If you've got very low airflow over the evaporator coil, the air coming out is going to be very cold because it's moving very slowly. And then you pull the dirty furnace filter, you've got more air coming out, and the air coming out should actually be warmer, and you will decrease your temperature split. Is that right?
I lost there, but
okay. Well, see, I can't understand it when you say it. You can't understand what I say, but Tessa's nodding. I think we're both
let me
saying
make
the
sure
same
I understand. Okay, let me try to rephrase this, and this is how I understand what you said, Ruben.
Right.
If you've got a really dirty filter, it slows down the airflow over the A coil, and so the air will get much colder because it's moving slower.
Yep.
You take out the dirty filter, the air moves faster, it can't cool off as much, and so it's warmer air coming out.
Exactly.
And
so your temperature split would go down.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just think of it like turning up the burner and turning down the burner on a stove.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
When you turn down the burner, you restrict the airflow. You turn down the burner, then it's going to get colder.
Yep. All right.
So
cool. All right. We're all on the same page.
Same page.
Perfect.
Okay. So we did that looking at humidity, but a little bit better way of doing that is looking at the return air temperature, which is on the left over here, and the return air wet bulb temperature, which is just simply a measurement of the amount of moisture in the air. So this is where that sling psychrometer thing comes in again. So wet bulb, dry bulb. So if we had 75-degree return air temperature, and we had a wet bulb temperature of 62 degrees, we should have a temperature split right around 19 degrees.
Okay.
This is like a psychrometric chart for an AC temperature differential where it should be based on the humidity level and the temperature.
Exactly. This is just a little bit more precise, accurate representation. So if our wet bulb temperature goes up and we're up to 72, which is really super humid, and we're back to 75, our temperature split will be 10 degrees. So depending on our humidity here, which is represented by this return air wet bulb, at 75 degrees, our temperature split could go from 23 to 10 degrees across this chart. So the answer is it depends. It depends on what this number is, which represents the humidity inside the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have a sling psychrometer?
No.
No. Don't get one.
But we do have tools that can tell us what the relative humidity is in someone's house and the temperature, and that's what you need to know, right?
Absolutely. So we have much, much better tools. I'm of, and they're different brands, but instead of that $7 thermometer from, well, I used to buy mine at Target instead of Walmart, but instead of that $7 thermometer, I use like $100 thermometer. And I use multiple thermometers. The brand I like is Testo, and they have a thermometer, hygrometer device that you can stick it into that supply duct and you can stick it into the return, and it will tell you what the dry bulb temperatures are and what the wet bulb temperatures are also.
Cool.
So,
cool.
And let me change this share thing here.
So do you carry around a chart with you, Mark, then too? Once you get the dry bulb and the wet bulb temps, do you carry around a chart so you can look at that chart and say, okay, this seems like an acceptable temperature split?
Yes, but I pretty much know, so,
Yeah,
but
of
you
course,
can
yes.
calculate that very precisely. My share thing is not working here for some reason.
So on the low range, help me understand. Low range for an acceptable temperature split. Let's just say it's a very high wet bulb temperature. There's a lot of humidity in the air. The AC is just turned on. You might get a temperature split of 10 degrees, and that might actually be acceptable. But then after you run it for a while and it reduces the dry bulb temperature, then you might
The wet
have a
bulb
temperature
temperature.
split of wet
It
bulb.
reduces the
Yeah.
wet bulb temperature.
Yes.
Okay. Then you might have a temperature split of like 15, and that's okay too. So what would be this range that you commonly see that temperature split falling in for ACs that are working properly?
Well, 18 to 20 degrees is about normal.
Okay.
If you've got the
It's
humidity
a
under
very
control
narrow, yeah.
and your airflow is correct. Again, this is assuming correct airflow, which
Hmm.
is something that's very difficult to measure.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be done, but it's not easy to do. Not something I do on a regular
Well,
basis.
we were talking about this with some specialists at the Energy Conservatory up in Minneapolis. They create tools for measuring things like this. They have an app and they have a tool that actually will tell you what the pressures are in the airflow and how it should be adjusted. And I'll tell you from talking to them, it sounds like most furnaces or air handlers don't have the proper airflow.
It's one of the number one problems.
Yeah.
And I'm familiar with that tool. That tool that they have that you can stick in a return duct
Yeah.
costs about $2,500. Uh, if I was still working full time, I'd probably buy one of those just for the heck of it, so I could play around with
Wow.
it and measure airflow,
Uh-huh.
because airflow is probably the number one problem we have in systems.
Yeah.
All right, so I take those testo probes and I connect them to a testo app, and they just connect automatically. And you can map these probes. In other words, you can put a label on your probe that says return air, one that says supply air, so that you know which one is which. And I just took this measurement today on my system. Our return air temperature was 69 degrees. Our supply air was 50 degrees. Relative humidity was 61.4. Now here's our wet bulb temperature, which was 60.4. And if we go back and look at that chart, which I'm not going to do because it's difficult to switch here, but that is going to be almost exactly what that chart says. With this return air temperature, this wet bulb temperature, we're going to end up with that 19 or 18 and a half degree temperature split.
It's right where it should be.
So you're taking this testo device, and the one you're using, it looks like it's the 605i.
Right.
And you have two of those?
Yeah.
Okay, you use two of them.
Yep.
You connect them to the app on your phone,
right.
And you're taking the two measurements at the same time, and then you're comparing those to that slide chart that you shared with us earlier to make sure that the numbers jive.
Right. But look, if my humidity is 50 to 60% and I'm at 18-degree split, 19-degree split, 20-degree split, that's good. I don't even have to look at the chart. I'm going to know that's good. Just
okay.
Because, the more you use these things, you become familiar with them. You know what's normal, what's not normal, or what's abnormal. So that's a basic measurement that you can take that is far, far more effective effective than or accurate than just measuring the air temperatures alone. And these thermometers are extremely accurate. Probably within, I know they're calibrated. They're probably within when you put them side by side, they're within a percentage of 1 degree. So, you're getting very, very accurate temperatures. They're designed for air conditioning to measure air temperatures. So that's.
I was going to say they also, I mean, besides the wet bulb temp and, the actual air temperature, relative humidity, they also show you the dew point on there and the absolute humidity. And I think that's a nice feature to have too. Just thinking in cold climates, it's in real time, you could show a client why they're getting condensation on their window based on their current humidity levels and air temp.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've never thought of that because we don't have that problem.
Not a problem where you are. Yeah. This can just kind of be a visual as to why you have condensation. Yeah. So it's a multi-purpose tool. I could see it being helpful for more than just AC measurements, but just understanding indoor humidity, moisture, condensation, all that too.
So, this is a basic. This I do every day, and basic temperatures and your wet bulb temperature, your humidity, whichever way you want to, use that. But this answers the question of, which is right, 16 or 22 degrees.
Sure. And just for the sake of argument, Mark, why couldn't someone just own one of these devices, take one reading, and then take another reading 1 minute later?
You could.
Okay.
This is just easier. Now, I'll take a screenshot of this. Or actually, what I do is I'm looking at this on my phone, and I take a picture of it with my camera, because if I take a screenshot, then I got to get that into my computer when I get back. But if I take a picture of it, it's already with all the other pictures. So I've got a picture of this, and I'll just put this in the report.
Okay.
So I've got an accurate representation of what was going on when I was there.
Sure.
So if there's a question later, this picture is in the report. So there's no question in anybody's mind as to whether or not this was operating properly when I was there.
Okay. And just to clarify, Ruben, you were saying could you just buy one of them and take one reading now and one reading later?
Exactly.
But I think, are you using two of these though, Mark, putting one in the return side and one in the supply side to get a measurement at the exact same time? So, okay, so you're just taking that measurement at the same time. You got two probes so you can do it together.
Right. So return air, supply air. And again, I've got these two probes mapped to return air and supply air. So when the app opens and we turn those on, the one that's in the return air shows up here as return air.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
nice. Okay.
Confuse them, when you're doing it.
Yeah, it's a nice sense. If you're trying to if you're putting this in your report like you are and taking a picture of it, it's nice to have the data points from the return and the supply side showing up at the same time side by side for comparison. So it makes sense to have two probes that way, I think.
Yeah. So now I'm using more than two probes now. So I'm going to go into the more advanced level of measurement. And there is an app for this. And it's called Measure Quick. It's for air conditioning contractors, but there's a free version that you can use that will give you a whole bunch of additional measurements and tell you a whole lot more about how the system is actually working. So for this, we're measuring, and you can do this without the app, but the app just makes it a whole lot easier to calculate. So all of these systems operate exactly, or they're designed to operate exactly the same. So they're designed to an AHRI standard, and the temperature difference between the air and your coils and your refrigerant are exactly the same on all of these units within a certain efficiency range. So if we're looking at our evaporator performance, our evaporator temperature is going to be our return air temperature minus about 30 degrees for a 13 SEER or up unit, plus our required superheat, which represents that latent heat in the refrigerant. And if we take that return air dry bulb and subtract that 30 degrees and add in our superheat, whatever that happens to be, and it's usually about 10, 12 degrees from almost every unit, then we're going to come up with a temperature that represents what our suction line should actually be. So I'm going to measure my 2 indoor air temperatures. I'm going to measure the outdoor air temperature, and I'm going to measure the suction line temperature and the liquid line temperature. Now, I can calculate those on a piece of paper and see if I'm within the right range, or I can use this Measure Quick app, which shows me my return air dry bulb temperature, my wet bulb temperature, my supply dry bulb, and this represents what, if we put gauges on this system, this represents what the pressures would actually be. This is a representation based on temperature, and all we're putting those gauges on there for is to measure the pressure, which we then convert to temperature. So this shows me my suction line temperature here at 56 degrees. My liquid line temperature is 84, and my superheat and subcooling. And it graphically tells me that I'm in the right ranges here, and so without really having to know anything or calculate anything.
To sum this up, basically, you're taking your dry bulb temperature. Well, you're taking your return temp and your supply temp, and you're also grabbing the humidity levels in those measurements, and then you're going outside. You're measuring the air temperature. You're measuring the temperature of the suction line and the supply line or the high pressure line, and you enter those 5 numbers into an app, and then it kicks back whether all of these numbers are in the green or they're not. Is that a concise way of saying it?
It's simpler than that. I don't enter them into an app. The app grabs them from the probes.
Oh, so okay.
Those testo probes are connected to the app, and it's reading those temperatures directly from the probes. I don't have to put anything in.
Okay.
All I put in is I put in the and that's really all I have to put in. I put in a number for superheat, usually 12 degrees for higher efficiency systems, and I put in a number for subcooling, which is what's going on at the condenser where we are removing that heat, and that number is usually found on the outdoor unit label. In this case, it's 9 degrees on my. I just took these this morning on my air conditioner, my heat pump at home, and it's a 15.2 SEER heat pump. It's new, but I can give you a piece of paper where you can calculate these, but using this Measure Quick app, you don't have to calculate.
For somebody who's never measured all these temperatures, I mean, the outdoor temperatures, the refrigerant line, the suction line, all these things, describe how long that takes and how you do that quickly. Is there brief explanation? I'm trying to picture what you're actually doing.
Okay, so on a TXV system, which almost everything is today, I mean, everything that's modern is a TXV. We're going to measure the suction line temperature, that's the cold line, the big fat one, at the air handler. So I've got a clamp type thermometer, testo clamp. I'm going to put on there. I'm going to put my 2, what were they, 950Is in the return and the supply. Outside, I've got another testo that just measured air temperature. I'm going to set that next to the condensing unit in the shade, not in the sun. And I'm going to put another clamp thermometer on the liquid line at the condensing unit.
Okay.
Then I'm just going to let them sit.
What do these clamp thermometers look like? I don't know about these.
So looks like if you think of a squeeze type clamp that you would use in woodworking, for example, it's just like that. Only it's got a little thermistor on one side of it that squeezes it against the refrigerant piping and very accurately measures the temperature of the refrigerant line.
I'm picturing like a chip clip. I have no
Exactly.
idea.
It's similar concept. Yeah, only it's a little bigger than that, but it fits in one hand. Now there are some that screw on, that it's a clamp that kind of screws together, but the Testo ones are just like a clamp you use with your hand. So they're very easy to use.
I'm Googling this, and I'm coming up with the Testo temperature clamp probe kit for the Testo digital manifolds, and there's a pair of them here, and they look exactly like chip clips.
Yeah.
Funny.
But the pads, instead of being flat, are slightly curved.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what Mark is talking about.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Big chip clip there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so I'm guessing, when this is something you've done every day, you can install the temperature probes and the supply and return and the clamp on the what is it, the suction line on the inside by the air handler, and then the other clamp outside, and then the other gauge for temperature on the outside. You can do that really pretty quickly. Then it's just letting it gather the data points.
Yeah, it would take about 5 minutes to do it the most.
Yeah. Wow, it doesn't take that much more effort than just doing the temperature rise. You just need the tools to do it.
Right. And this Measure Quick app is actually pretty incredible. It's really amazing the work that's gone into that and the science behind it. And there's a lot more stuff in there than we would ever need as a home inspector. There's an advanced version of this that you have to pay for, where you can take a picture of the barcode on the equipment, and it'll actually populate the whole application with all of the parameters for that piece of equipment.
Oh, wow.
Using AI.
Cool.
But that's beyond what we need to do. But, AC guys, they can make a nice visual report with all the information in it for their customers.
Yeah.
All I want to know is, am I all right here?
Okay, I think I found the app. You said it's called Measure Quick, HVAC, and the logo for the app, it's a little M with a big green Q. Is that the one?
Right, like this one right in here.
So,
Okay. All right. Yep. All right. Perfect.
Quick question: How much do these tools cost then, roughly, to be able to gather all this data and take these measurements?
I think those Testo things are around $100 a piece.
Yeah, I think the one you were showing, it's gone up since you bought them last. I think they're about $150. So you got a pair of those at $150, and then it looks like you can buy a pair of clamps. I don't know if these are the right ones. They're selling a pair for $78, or maybe if you get the more expensive individual ones, it looks like they're about $100. So all in, maybe about $500 worth of tools.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, this is a more advanced form of measurement. It's not every home inspector is going to want to do this. I mean, it's just for the nerdy people.
Well, and that was my next question. I don't think probably any home inspector that I've run across in Minnesota does this. Ruben, have you met anybody that takes these types of
Not once, never. Nope.
No, because
I'm wondering who does that in Florida. Besides you, Mark. Do you run into home inspectors that do this?
No one.
Okay.
Because they don't know about this app, and to do it manually, you can do it manually on a sheet of paper, but you've got to take your indoor drywall, you got to subtract 30 degrees, you got to add 12 degrees for superheat, and that'll give you
No.
a suction line temperature. Then you got to
No.
measure the suction line temperature and compare those. So
No,
No,
this
thanks.
has already done that here. You know, it's
Yeah.
and then
Okay.
for the outdoor unit, you got to take the outdoor air temperature. You got to add, depending on the efficiency, 15, 20 degrees. Subtract your subcooling, 9, 10 degrees, whatever it is, and that'll tell you what your liquid line temperature should be. Well, this has already done that right here. So, you know, as long as we're in that green, we know those temperatures are good.
Okay. Okay.
Well, thank you for coming on our show today and explaining how HVAC contractors actually check systems to see if they're working right and figure out what the problem is.
Actually, this method is kind of new for air conditioning people also. So the trend today is to never put gauges on the system. Is to use this app like this and just take these measurements that I've taken, and that gives you a very, very accurate representation of what your gauges would tell you anyway.
Okay.
And there's some resistance to that. There's some people that don't really, you know, older AC guys that don't really get their heads wrapped around that yet.
Newer technologies, yeah.
It's kind of new for AC guys also. But there's a whole lot of reasons you don't really want to put gauges on systems, because you risk losing refrigerant, you risk contaminating refrigerant with different types of refrigerant that might be in your hoses and gauges from the last unit you were at. And it's not really, the other thing is, you don't know what those pressures should be when you walk up there. So, you know, once you've started up the system, commissioned it, there's not really any reason to put gauges on it anymore.
Interesting.
So this is a non-invasive way of checking the system, because you're just putting clamps on things and I mean, you are taking measurement of the air temp going in and out of the system, so you might have, you know, a little invasion there. But
here it says AC non-invasive. That's the type of test we're doing.
Sure.
There's a bunch of different tests you can do. You can use this with gauges too, this app.
Okay.
Right.
So I didn't know that the common method of doing it for AC contractors was, I mean, it's invasive, but they're shifting over to doing this, it sounds like.
Some of them are, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like getting home inspectors to go from that $7 thermometer to the $100 thermometer. You know.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Well, it seems like the next step here, Tess, I think you need to meet up with Mark. You need to go over to his house, and I need you to shoot a video of him doing this for us, okay?
I would love to. I'd love to see you do this in person. Yep. And learn from you.
We can do that. Absolutely.
Let's plan on it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Mark, any closing thoughts? Anything else we didn't cover? Because this is mind-blowing, and it takes me a little bit to digest this. I may be ordering a few of these tools and testing them out myself.
It took me a long time to digest this too, so don't feel bad. And I've been doing it manually with a piece of paper, which is even more mind-blowing and complicated or difficult to comprehend.
Longhand.
So again, all this assumes that your airflow is correct. And the first thing that you should be looking at as an inspector is, is that evaporator coil dirty? You know, is that filter extremely dirty? Because that's going to affect your temperatures, because that affects airflow, which is heat. So that's really the most important thing you got to look at to start with, is condition of that coil, indoors and the outdoor coil also.
And maybe
this is just one piece of the puzzle. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just thinking this is one piece of the puzzle of diagnosing if your system is cooling properly. I mean, there's a lot of other reasons why it may be malfunctioning or not cooling right. It could be restrictions in airflow, or too much supply, not enough return, dirty evaporator coils, filters, fan speed is wrong, all those things. But this is just a snapshot of some of the data points that'll tell you, yeah, it's the temperature split is within this acceptable range and it looks good, or it doesn't.
Yeah, and one other point you would want to look at is if you have a return duct in an attic or wherever, a long return duct system in, outside the living space, you might want to take a temperature reading inside the house and compare that to the temperature in your return air duct at the air handler or furnace, wherever you're at. And if there's a big difference there, then you got a return air leak.
Yeah, it's a
And
duct
you're going to
leakage.
get an abnormal temperature split because you've got a huge amount of latent heat. If you're sucking, humid air out of the attic and that's at 105 degrees and 70% humidity, that is going to affect the operation of the system also. So that's another thing that you got to look at, is that duct system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this is a lot to comprehend, Mark. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for blowing our minds, Mark, and making us realize that what we're doing is very inadequate for assessing whether or not an AC is working right.
Well, you're not alone there, because there are very, very few home inspectors that understand any of this stuff. And it only took me 30 years to figure it all out too. So.
Well, my takeaway from this big picture is like the humidity really matters for how an AC unit should perform or how much it's cooling, what the temperature split is. So just be aware of that. If it's really humid or really dry, that temperature differential will change.
Yes.
Yeah. Super humid, low temperature differential.
Right. And if you're walking into a vacant house where the system hasn't been on and you're in air conditioning weather, it's going to run for a long time to get down to a normal temperature split.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it's not working right, though.
And if you're going back and looking at, if you're looking at this right here, your return air relative humidity, until you get that down, into a more normal range, then, your temperature split doesn't really mean a whole lot. It's not going to be, accurate representation of how that system is operating.
Excellent.
Let's not get into a discussion then of what a quote normal range for indoor relative humidity is.
Well, you tell me, what is it?
It depends, Mark.
It depends on where you're at, doesn't it?
It does.
In Florida, it's a whole lot different than other parts of the country. And in Minnesota, it's a whole lot different in the winter than it is in the summer. So it really depends. The other thing, this humidity is kind of high here. And as these systems get more efficient, they are actually worse at removing moisture from the air. That's one of the ways they squeeze more efficiency out of these systems. So there are going to be, I think, coming down the road, there are going to be some issues with that. And if you think about mini splits, the number one problem I have with mini splits is humidity control. Because they are super efficient and they're typically oversized. And the contractor thinks, well, this is a variable speed unit. It can run at all these different speeds. So even if we don't have this big cooling load, we can run this system that's going to remove humidity. But these super high efficient systems do not remove a lot of humidity as much as the older system did.
Interesting.
That is new. That I'm just kind of digesting this. Another piece of information that's new to me is that it's not just a system being oversized that can be problematic for being able to, remove humidity from the air. It can struggle with that if it's oversized. But you're saying newer, high efficiency cooling systems are less able to remove humidity as well. Yeah. Okay. That is a big problem. I think we're moving towards needing just whole house dehumidification systems, especially in humid climates, as we build more energy efficient, airtight structures with efficient cooling systems.
Absolutely. Because you'll find out, Tessa, that we have more mold problems down here in the wintertime than we do the summertime. Because summertime we're dehumidifying 24/7. The wintertime, we're not running that air conditioner very much. We're not dehumidifying very much, but the humidity is still high. I mean,
Yeah.
this is March. Humidity inside my house is 61%. And that's after running the system for a little bit. So
tell you what, my skin appreciates it, Mark, but my house doesn't.
Yeah. So I have had multiple cases of people who have mini splits who have just developed some horrendous mold problems. Because again, oversizing and it from a logical standpoint, you would think that, okay, this highly variable speed system is going to be capable of running at a lower load condition and removing humidity, but they don't.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. Rube and I were just talking about recently on another podcast about how, energy efficiency doesn't always guarantee better performance. You can actually create more building durability issues, moisture issues with that improvement. So it's not only true for like a building envelope or house, it's like the actual mechanical systems as well.
Yeah, there are always unintended consequences.
Yes, unintended consequences.
Yeah. Well, Mark, if people want to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you? You got an email or a phone number you want to throw out, or a website?
My website is besttampainspector.com.
Okay.
Or they can just search for my name. They'll find me.
Cool. Well, and for the listeners, if you got any thoughts, if you got questions, don't send them to me. Ask Mark, because I'm not going to be able to answer. But if you got any thoughts, you're welcome to email me or Jessa. Our email is podcast@structuretech.com. And Mark, can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate it. This is great.
Thanks, Mark.
Mind blowing. This is why I do the podcast.
Where can people find that chart, Mark, that shows them what's an acceptable temperature
I'll
split
put
or
it in the
temperature
show
differential?
notes, Jess.
Okay. Thank you.